everyone, and welcome to the show. This is episode number 78 of Pop Culturally Deprived, and today we're going to be talking about The Dark Crystal on your Today the Ritual Gives No Comfort podcast. I'm Andy Kay.
And I'm Matthew Vose.
And this week we are joined by Amanda, one of the hosts of the Wine and Three Quarters podcast, a podcast about fandom, growth, friends, stories, drinking, and maybe saving the world.
Thank you. The inflection on that was perfect. Thank you guys for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here.
I've been listening since shortly after you guys started Pop Culturally Deprived, aside from the Farscape episodes, because I haven't watched that series yet, and I don't want to be spoiled. But I am thrilled to be here talking with you today about The Dark Crystal.
It's fab having you on.
Absolutely. And I think after we finish this episode, you should absolutely go start watching the Farscape series. I mean, clearly you like puppets.
It is definitely on my list. I own it. We're just a little busy with our podcast right now. We're going through Fringe and also The Expanse, and that's taking a lot of my time.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think we can agree what watching TV as well as podcasting does. It takes some time.
Yes, it does.
The Dark Crystal, I think, possibly even before we'd suggested it, this was like, oh, watch that film, I'll come and record that film, watch that film. Why were you quite so excited for The Dark Crystal?
I really wanted to talk about this show because, in large part, because I have some extreme nostalgia for it. I don't remember when I first saw it, but it's been part of my life when I was a child. It came out when I was 5 years old, so it's something I grew up with. I really love things that are twisted, and The Dark Crystal took the Muppets, which I love, and translated them into this warped fairy tale setting in a way that was terrifying and delightful. And also, as someone who is a maker of things, I'm a knitter, I do some costuming, very minimal, but I'm totally captivated by the creativity and the artistic talent that is on display in this film. It's amazing, and I would love to go and see some of these creatures close up.
Yeah, the film, the way I keep describing it is technical marvel, and it is. Like, there's basically nothing in this that is a camera trick. It is all practical on screen in front of you. So good.
Yeah, there's almost no special effects. It's incredible when you think of the amount of just practical workmanship that went into it.
Absolutely. So, seminal children's classic. Mandy, how come you've never seen this?
I didn't know this movie existed until we started doing this podcast. I mean, that's how sheltered I was. I mean, and to be fair, it came out the same year I was born, so, like, clearly I didn't know about it then.
So it's super old. Oh.
I've already determined that 1980 movies are, like, the black hole in my life. But, yeah, I honestly had no idea this movie even existed. I had never heard of it. To put that in perspective, I had never heard of The Labyrinth until I was in high school.
Okay, that puts it in perspective. That was another childhood favorite of mine.
Yeah, so I did get on board The Labyrinth. Well, okay, no, that's not true. I've heard of and seen Labyrinth. Can't say I got on board, but this one, it never came across my radar until people started suggesting it for the show. And I was like, I don't understand what this thing is. Okay, it's puppets. Why?
I definitely think it's achieved a cult status over the years, too. A lot of us are familiar with it from our childhoods, from being immersed in Muppets, starting with Sesame Street and then The Muppet Show, and just really loving those creatures. And I think there's been a bit of a resurgence of that lately with some of the reality television shows like Face Off or Jim Henson's Creature Shop. And I think that's bringing about a resurgence of the interest in it.
Yeah, I definitely can tell it's super popular, at least among our online community. Earlier this week when I hadn't yet watched this movie yet, and I had some time to kill one night. And so I tweeted, should I watch The Dark Crystal or should I play BioShock Infinite on the Xbox? Because I didn't know which one I wanted to do. And without fail, every single person said, excuse me, go watch The Dark Crystal right now. I did not go watch The Dark Crystal that night, but that's what everybody suggested. So I clearly figured out that this is something that people really like and really enjoy.
And part of that's because we know lots of sensible people who know you get your homework done early so that your Saturday's free to party.
Oh, is that what I got wrong? Okay.
Okay. The Dark Crystal is a fantasy film released in 1982. It was directed by Jim Henson and Frank Oz and made with primarily animatronic or puppets to portray the characters, with Kiran Shah doing the physical performances for Jen, Kira, and Algra. The film was modestly successful initially. It was touted as a family-friendly movie, but there were concerns about the darker elements of the film compared to the normal Muppet Show type material, and it also came out in a very busy Christmas season. It went on to be relatively successful. It turned a profit at the box office that year. It was actually quite well received in a number of international countries? In a number of other countries, and got a better reception over the years since release.
I read that this was the highest grossing film in both France and Japan in 1983.
Wow.
Yeah. I was surprised at that.
I don't know whether anything else big came out that that's such a success because it beat out, E.T., which was its problem in America,
right.
Or whether it was just, they released it in June when nothing else was coming out.
Yeah, I know. It was the 16th highest grossing film in the United States that year.
Yeah, eventually it went on, did okay.
Yeah.
A long tail, I think we'd say.
Yeah.
There have always been ideas for a sequel to The Dark Crystal. A script was developed 25 years after the original came out. It was in and out of development since then, with the Henson Company never able to produce it. The plans were ultimately dropped, and that screenplay was turned into a comic book series called The Power of the Dark Crystal. There is a prequel series due to come to Netflix in 2018 or 19 called The Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance. It is currently in production in the UK. And Mandy, for anyone who's not watched it, who's listening to this, which is quite fun to hear that people listen even if they've not seen the film, what is The Dark Crystal about?
Well, I stole this synopsis straight from IMDb because I was having a hard time writing something concise. So IMDb says, on another planet in the distant past, a gelfling embarks on a quest to find the missing shard of a magical crystal and to restore order to his world. Yeah.
Nice. I had a feeling you might go like a young person has to take a mystical object and walk across a country to destroy it in the place where it was made.
Well, that... I wish I had thought of that.
That seems to describe quite a few movies.
Yeah. With a trusty sidekick.
And meets interesting folks along the way.
Yeah.
How was everyone able to watch the film?
Well, I own the Blu-ray version, the latest one that came out, the 35th anniversary, and it's beautiful.
Oh, I bet that is beautiful.
Does it have any interesting additions, a second disc or anything?
It does have a lot of special features. There's a commentary track with Brian Froud, which was really interesting to listen to, aside from one very problematic aspect of him using the M word to refer to the actors with dwarfism that portrayed some of the characters. So just pointing out that was a pretty problematic piece of the commentary. The rest of it was really interesting. And they also have shots of the original video of the Skeksis speaking in the alien language before they translated everything to English. So that was particularly interesting for me to watch.
Oh, I bet. Fascinating. Mandy, where did you find it?
It's not available anywhere on any of the subscription services here, so it is only available to rent digitally, but luckily this is one that Joseph owns, and so we have it in our house, and I got to watch it that way.
Hooray!
Excellent.
It's only available to be rented in the UK as well on the digital platforms, but I found the DVD in a secondhand DVD shop.
Ooh, good find.
Yeah, you're getting really good at finding stuff in your secondhand shops.
I keep having to go to shops like over the last month or two. So it's just anytime I'm out, I just pull up the episode schedule. Okay, what are we doing? Okay, in 2 months we're doing that. I need to find the DVD now.
Okay.
Although this one, they were really close to closing. Oh, this is an absolutely incidental story, but they were really close to closing. And the guy was taking ages finding the discs in the back cupboard thing. And eventually he comes out and he's like, I've got a disc and there's supposed to be 2 discs. And we had a look at it, and what seems to have happened is they had 2 copies once upon a time. A 1-disc version and 2-disc version, and someone's bought the 1-disc version and been given the 2 discs from the 2-disc version. So for whatever reason, I only have the 1 disc. I have the wrong edition, but
You
still got the movie on it, so that's okay. Yeah. Hey ho. The voice actors are not people who went on to do a huge amount of other stuff, barring one exception. But the creators, particularly Jim Henson and Frank Oz, should be well known. Mandy, what's your experience of them?
Well, largely, okay, I've written 4 things down, 2 for each of them, and 50% of them are things I know because of the podcast. So, Jim Henson is the Muppets, so primarily the Muppet Babies, and of course, we've now done Muppet Christmas Carol on the show. And Frank Oz, I know him as Yoda, but he also directed Little Shop of Horrors. And I think that's all I got for those 2.
Okay. Which is good. Those are pretty important things.
Yeah.
The film itself is high fantasy, aimed at a younger audience, involving puppets and non-human creatures. So examples of other things like this: Labyrinth, The Never-Ending Story, and of course Farscape, made by the Henson Company. So what's your experience of other types of things like that?
I have actually seen all of those things. I did see The Labyrinth in high school. Wasn't impressed by it. Sorry, everybody. I did love The Never-Ending Story. I loved both parts, actually, 1 and 2. And Farscape we did for the show, and if you've listened to those episodes, or when you listen to those episodes, Amanda, you will discover that I absolutely loved it.
Fantastic. I can't wait to get to those.
That's good.
Okay. So you're comfortable with this kind of non-human but practical character
absolutely.
interacting with human characters? Okay,
yes.
Good. So that very much sums up The Dark Crystal. Did you enjoy The Dark Crystal?
Oh, no.
You're just ripping that Band-Aid off as fast as possible, aren't you?
Yeah.
Don't ask me that question.
I will say, so while I was watching it, I was really disappointed because I hoped, beyond hope, that I was going to love it since everybody else loves this movie. But I was struggling to get through it. It was tough. But I was watching it narratively, for the story and for what emotions it could evoke, for investment in the characters and those sorts of things. And they're things I never experienced through it. I was like, Jen is the dumbest character in the planet. There's no actual story here, which we will get to in our conversation. And so from that perspective, I didn't enjoy it. From the perspective of the technical aspects that you guys have already gushed about a little bit, I did. I mean, it was beautiful. It was clearly well done. The puppets were amazing. And so I can see the scope of just how well done this movie was. But as a movie that I watched, I did not enjoy it as an experience. I'm so sorry.
Good. Okay.
I will say, so I did find, and I think you guys are going to talk about some of this a little bit later. I will have Matthew link to this in the show notes. I went and started Googling after this because I was like, why is this something people like so much? I just don't understand. And I found on sci-fi.com one of those thoughts docs like mine. So it was somebody did X number of 65 thoughts they had while they were watching The Dark Crystal. And it made me appreciate it a little bit more because they commented so much on how really Kira is the star of this movie and not Jen. And so once I started thinking about that, I could appreciate it a little bit more. And I know, Amanda, you wanted to talk about that, so I'm not going to steal that from you. But I want to just say up front that after seeing that perspective from somebody else, I can sit back and say, okay, if I watch this movie slightly differently than it was intended, then it's okay, maybe?
Yeah, I think there's a very important thing with this film of coming to it at the right age. It can come across as heavily derivative, as I've already hinted at, of other material, and it's fairly simple in places as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if you come to it and go, oh, this is magical and beautiful, and it's even more magical and beautiful than a sort of special effect laden film or an animated film because it's all real and tangible, I think it's more enjoyable because you can appreciate it for that. But if you're coming to it now and going, oh, hey, puppets, cool. And it's a tech demo for those puppets. Cool. It's less grabbing, perhaps.
And I think you make a really good point there, Matthew, with regards to the age that you come to this story. I came to this story very, very young. And to me, as I'm reflecting more and more on why I like this movie so much, it really speaks to me as a fairy tale from my childhood. This is a story I grew up on. It's got very mythic themes, but not a whole lot of narrative oomph to it. And to me, it's almost like a children's picture book brought to screen.
Okay. I like that perspective.
So I don't go to this movie necessarily for a lot of depth in the narrative right now. I go to it much more for the visual and that sense of nostalgia. But I think that as a child, it's an incredibly appealing movie.
I guess, I don't know. I have a hard time with that idea too, because this movie was freaking terrifying. As an adult watching this movie, it was freaking horrifying in so many places. And so I'm sitting here thinking, like, have things that I think are kid appropriate, have they changed that much since the 80s? And maybe they have. But I just cannot imagine like an 8 or 9-year-old going to a movie theater and watching this.
Well, I can speak to that because they recently re-released The Dark Crystal for 2 weekends to some of the local theaters a few months back. And I went to a showing of it because why wouldn't you? And sitting next to me was a man who had brought his son, who was maybe 4 or 5 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
And I was a little panicked because I remembered how delightfully scared this movie had made me, and I was afraid for this child. But he sat through the whole thing and was entranced and didn't seem scared at all. His big question was, why are there 3 sons?
Okay, interesting. Okay, see, I just know nothing about children. That's the thing. Everything I think I know about children is wrong. Okay.
And I think it speaks, too, to Jim Henson when he created this movie. He purposefully wanted to have darker themes because he felt like children can be scared. And that's an okay emotion for children to feel. And it's okay for them to have the whole gamut of emotions.
I think that's fair, but I think it was a little heavy-handed. But that's just me.
I wonder if there's something in the alien nature of it that makes it an accessible scariness. You know, it's monstrous in places, the Skeksis and the beetle things, whose names I now can't remember.
The Gartham.
Gartham. I was trying to... Guthrie? No, that's not it. They are scary, but they are arguably not something that exists in that way. On Earth, certainly, and compare it to the sort of scariness of grown-up monster movies and the Alien from Alien and so on, which are genuinely scary, but are preying on more primal fears of the darkness and being hunted, whereas this is just a fairy tale, Grimm's fairy tales type darkness.
Okay, I can accept that.
Yeah, I think the most scary parts of it for me as a child and kind of growing up were the scene where they have the trial by stone and they're exiling the Chamberlain and they're ripping all his clothes to shreds and then ostracizing him, which to me what they did to him was scarier than killing him, honestly.
Yeah, it really sets up their kind of vile evilness. Because it's a really harsh thing to send someone naked into the world in exile like that, and it really does set up of, okay, these guys do not care. They don't just kill him; they want to punish just because he failed to become emperor.
It's interesting. That's not what I thought the scariest part was. But it is.
What did you think the scariest was?
It is similar in nature because, again, it doesn't involve them killing. They didn't actually kill anybody in this movie. It was when they took the life essence from the podling. And this scene where the podling was actually transformed. Like, that was scary to me as an adult, as an almost 36-year-old woman. That was horrifying to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think that's the GIF that I used when I was complaining about the terrifying puppets on Twitter last night. I pulled that one because that was the one that stuck with me. The way they made the eyes like go white and the purple and the red reflection. Yeah, it was creepy.
I was particularly interested to watch that scene in my most recent rewatch because of what they had talked about in terms of the practical effect for that they had used needles shooting milk into the eyeballs.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's much scarier.
From behind, and they could control that way. They could remove it very quickly, and they could make it go in very quickly to create that milky effect to the eyes. And I just thought that was a delightful behind the scenes practical effect piece.
Practical effects amaze me, honestly, more than special effects do, because you have to find a real world way to make these things happen. And you have to be so creative, and I am not that creative. I would never be able to figure out how to do this stuff. It's fantastic.
Yeah, because again, now they just do that with CJ.
Yeah.
But knowing like, oh, that actually happened. The thing did that. Excellent. Marvel. Let's talk about the story and the writing itself. I'm not even sure it fulfills the hero's journey enough because he doesn't kind of return. He just goes wandering and people help him along his way. I had a memory of basically nothing happening. Of it being they walk there, have an incident, and then he puts the crystal back together. But actually watching it this time, I'm like, no, there are things that happen on the path.
No,
there's just not...
nothing happened in this movie. What are you talking about?
Well, can we say that Jen made nothing happen?
Well, yes, yeah.
Because really... he's the nominal hero of the story, but he never would have made it past Agra's without Kira. And to my mind, this is basically a Muppet version of A New Hope. A farm boy leaves home to find adventure. He meets a lot of scary-looking creatures. And a princess who knows more than he will ever learn saves his bacon 100% of the time.
Yeah, you are 1,000% correct there. And it's like, I really want to draw parallels to a Lord of the Rings or a Narnia or even the Grimm fairy tales because fantasy sort of fits with fantasy. But yeah, this is taking a lot from Star Wars. And especially the bit where the Podling's village is attacked and then he throws the shard away. It's like, no. Her people have just been taken. You do not get to mope, you mopey moper. And it just reminds me of Luke being like, oh, I really miss Obi-Wan that I've just met. And you have Leia comforting him when her people have died.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's the same thing, too, when the Gartham steal the podlings. Her concern is for Jen's arm or whatever, and not the family that's been taken. That part does not sit well with me. Because we have Kira, who is a great character. She is very well versed in the languages of all the people and the animals around her. She's very intelligent. She knows how to get stuff done. She knows about the Skeksis and has all this knowledge. And yet she's still not the hero of the story. The hero is this kind of bumbling, clueless man boy.
Who drops the shard.
Oh my god.
Yes. And she has to save the day once again, resulting in her death. Which, because it's a fantasy story, doesn't stick. But...
Yeah.
Okay, well, can somebody please explain something to me? Jen was raised by the Mystics, who, by very definition of this tale, is part of the origin story of this whole quest thing. He was raised by them. How does he not know what the Dark Crystal is? How does he not know who the Skeksis are? How does he not know that what he's supposed to do when he finds the shard is take it to fix the big crystal? How are these things that have somehow passed him by?
Because he sits naked by a river playing with his pipe. That's not a euphemism.
I know, but still, how? Like, how are you raised by these people whose lives were fundamentally affected by this crystal and not know what it is? Like, that makes no sense to me. Like, the world building in this story made no sense to me, and it was frustrating.
I can definitely see how that would be a frustrating take on it. My read on the Skeksis and the Mystics division is that with the splitting of their fundamental traits, the Mystics are solely focused on their spiritual aspects, and they're so far removed from the day-to-day mundanity of life, they don't even care. It's like they're caught in this inertia of stillness and ritual that they just engage in day after day, and they really don't even care about the outside world. I don't know why they even picked Jen up, honestly, because they seem to have such little caring for the physical pieces of the world.
I wonder if they already knew the prophecy when they picked him up, and that's why. Maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the Podlings might have known the prophecy and thought it was going to be Kira? And arguably it should have been Kira, but no, yeah, the Mystics are kind of living their Burning Man lives, communing and enjoying things. And I suspect they're not actually teaching him necessarily. It's just only at the point at which, okay, he has to know it because we now know this is where the Great Conjunction happens. So it's a big inflection point of the life of this planet.
Yeah, I think I don't know. They even knew where to go get the shard, and it was just frustrating. That's all.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's really just is not a whole lot of narrative there.
And when there is narrative, they're telling us stuff that we already know. Jen's internal dialogue, oh my God. So I think one of my thoughts was, I was just repeating what he said. This is what I came for. The Dark Crystal. The 3 suns. The shard. Like, really? That's just some bang-up writing right there.
Sure, Jen. Sure.
Yes.
I think the best is I'm not ready to go alone. And then 2 beats, alone then.
Yeah.
He did that a couple of times, and I thought it was hysterical.
Mm-hmm. It's not great, but it's funny.
and by the end, I guess I did get a little bit invested because I did literally when at the very end, when Kira and Jen are both in the chamber, you know, I'm sitting here going, just run and jump, dude. Come on, you can run and jump. And then he did. And then he dropped the shard. And then he gets the dang crystal because Kira threw it at him and they stabbed her. And, you know, instead of catching the crystal and immediately putting it in the hole, he just stops and he's just sitting there watching Kira die, which I kind of understand, but I am literally yelling at the TV at this point, oh my God, just heal the crystal. So I guess I got a little bit invested in the story.
Well, I think they keep you hanging in that moment because I think it's supposed to be that precise moment when the 3 suns align that he's got to put the shard in right then, otherwise it's not going to work. But it does drag on.
Yeah, but I mean, I did get to the point where I wanted him to heal the crystal, so there were some good things that came out of this. I don't want everybody to think I just hate it.
Yeah, and it would be totally okay if you did absolutely hate it too. You know, you gotta, like, certain things are not for everybody.
That is true.
But I do think that this brings up another point that could have made this a more interesting movie. I referenced earlier the video of the Skeksis talking in an alien language. And originally, when the movie was filmed, all of the creatures except for the Gelflings spoke in alien languages. And then they tested the movie with preview audiences, and it tested so poorly. Folks were coming back saying they didn't understand what was happening. So all of the dialogue for the movie of the other creatures aside from the Gelflings was rewritten in English, very painstakingly, matching English words to the already filmed mouth movements of the puppets.
Okay.
Which I think leads us to some of the maybe stranger dialogue choices in some of the scenes that just seem silly.
I hate your whimper.
Well, the whimper was still in the original version. But having watched those scenes with the alien language piece, I think I would have liked the movie better if they had just kept to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the original idea for it and that thing of having different languages and showing the different parts of this world and how they work, it would have evoked a really strong sort of fairy tale feel. It would have felt like a Studio Ghibli film, which is almost the closest thing I can compare this to. This kind of scary, kind of grown up, a bit coming of age, but also very fantastical. Mandy, you remember Spirited Away? It's got a lot of that being evoked in it. Mm-hmm. And if you imagine the beginning has this the long narrative of the dying race, dying emperor, and so on, and all about the ritual. That if they just intercut the three things going on, Jen and the Mystics and the Skeksis, to show they're all kind of going through the same thing at the same time, it could have come together. It could have really evoked, like, there's a lot going on here, but in different ways. But instead, they write this narrative, which is very well written about. Today the ritual brings no comfort. Today the pipe brings no comfort. They're using the same language for each different group, but it's delivered so matter-of-factly. It doesn't really land. It doesn't sort of evoke that, oh, there's really interesting things, there's parallels, and we've got a juxtaposition set up straight away. It's just, I'm giving you exposition here, and today the ritual brings no comfort. Okay, thanks, narrator dude.
Indeed. And I think in thinking about why I like this movie so much, it is the visuals of it. It's so beautiful. I mean, down to every last detail, they worked really hard to make this a fully fleshed out world. And I would almost be happy just watching the movie with the soundtrack. No vocals whatsoever, because I would still get a lot of enjoyment out of it because the music is amazing. I think the score for it, anytime I hear those opening notes, my heart swells a little bit, which, it gives me this real tangible sense of childlike delight when I hear that music. So I think to watch the movie just for the visual pieces of it, you could have the Skeksis talking in their alien language and still understand what's going on. And it might not be quite as goofy at times. And I think the emotional pieces might actually land a little stronger if we're relying more so on our own interpretation of what's being said.
Yeah, it's a little difficult to emote with the Mystics at times because they're just so placid.
But they did get the good guy death with the sparkles and the fading away rather than the bad guy death of just turning into dust.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm serious. Like they didn't, there was no emotion in the way they spoke, but at least they did something to kind of help us see which direction things are going.
Yes, it was a very clear visual signal between how they treated the two deaths of who were the good guys and who were the not so good guys.
And the good guy gets to take all his artifacts with him. They're sent to him in the afterlife. It's lovely.
But do you really want luggage in the afterlife? I don't think I want to be weighed down.
That's fair.
I don't know. I think I want my podcast set up so I can still podcast in the afterlife.
That's a lovely idea.
Now that I've completely derailed the conversation.
We had some tweets from our friend Lauren at Six Legged Knits, who you might remember was a huge Farscape fan as well. So, of little surprise is this is one of the three movies of my childhood. The other two are Labyrinth and The Princess Bride. I have always been completely blown away by the artistry and the detail of the world. While the story is fairly simple, I think that's a good thing. It allows the world to bloom. I think that matches very much what we're saying. Like, when you can just enjoy what's being presented on screen to you. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah. Agreed.
She goes on, there is a children's museum in Pittsburgh where you can see some of the puppets from the movie, including one of the Mystics. And I remember that every time we went, I would go and just stare into that case, taking in the details until made to move on by impatient siblings. And then, even when you learn how it's done, it's still amazing. The innovations in puppetry that start right here make so much more possible, including, of course, my beloved Farscape. And I'm with John. Halosians will always be the Skeksis to me.
I totally understand that now.
Yeah.
I don't, but I can't wait.
It is not only is it a heavy Dark Crystal reference, it's one of the best Farscape episodes it's done in. So,
terrific.
Yeah. Even as an adult, I think it stands up. I find Aughra, in particular, more irritating now than I did as a kid, mostly because I just hear Frank Oz and Yoda. But overall, I find the thematic implications of resolution really interesting. The wholly good mystics are weak and lack ambition. The wholly evil Skeksis, destructive to the point of their own destruction. Only when combined is there balance, ambition tempered with generosity. Destructive to their own destruction is a bit tautological. Exploitative to their own destruction would be better, especially since, as a continually falling population, they would have to be really greedy to wreck things that badly. Though, sadly as an adult, I realise the Gelflings are still screwed as erased. My biologist brain cannot help noticing that 2 is not a sustainable population.
Oh my gosh, those are all delightful comments.
Yeah, so basically every point, yeah, 100%. But that whole thing about the balance, the two sides of the creatures, when you start feeling that, because it's set up a little bit, like I say, with the narration in the beginning and the 2 rituals and bringing no satisfaction, and then the death of the wisest and the death of the emperor. But then as we go through and you see the injury on both of them together, and you see one disappearing when one dies, and they gradually merge, and it's really interesting how everything in this world has another side. They lean on it with Kira having wings. And it's like, well, of course you don't have wings. You're a boy. Like, even there, we're drawing a very clear a 1 and a 0 or 2 sides of a coin, that kind of thing. And it's a really nice way to do a film. I just feel like they could do more with it. It's just isn't it interesting when there are 2 sides to things?
Mm-hmm.
So listening to you talk about all of this stuff and hearing all of Lauren's comments, like I feel like I'm really interested in this world. And I want to see it done more and better than how they did it. Is kind of where I'm coming, because I really just don't think they did it very well from a story perspective of being interested in what they were trying to tell me. But now listening to all of the things that you guys have brought into it, I can see all of those things. And now I'm kind of really interested to see what Netflix is going to do with it. Because seeing this story, or at least this world brought to life in 2018 or 2019, is going to give me a lot more of the information that I want to see. I imagine it's going to be much more heavy on the CGI rather than the puppetry, which will really take away from it if that's what the direction they go in. But I'm really interested now, because I kind of do want to see more of this world that they created in a way where I'm invested and fulfilled by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm looking forward to the new Netflix show, but I have that same hesitation. Are we going to see the practical pieces that make this movie so incredibly special, or is it going to be a reliance on CGI more than anything?
Well, they're still working with the Hensons, and so I would hope that they would rely very heavily on puppetry.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing more special about this movie than the puppets themselves, because they're the stars.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if not, because certainly a lot of the stuff that Disney have done with Star Wars, it's all been about trying to do more practical effects and sort of understanding when they did the Star Wars prequels, too many digital effects makes it a less interesting film. And there's a real culture for it these days.
That is a really excellent point.
And just to follow up on the point about the museum in Pittsburgh, the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle usually has some Dark Crystal things on display. They have one of the maquettes for the Mystics, so you can see them up close as well, and other things. So everyone out on the Pacific Northwest should go and visit.
And I think there's, is it the Museum of Motion Picture, maybe, in New York? I believe they have a Skeksis and some other pieces of the Dark Crystal there as well. So I'm looking forward to my next trip to New York because I'm going to stop off there.
Oh, excellent. We will look forward to pictures, I'm sure.
Indeed. Probably won't be for a few months, but I'll get there eventually.
Fab. So we've taken the film apart a little bit, in not the nicest way. There are bits of it lying around us, but some of those bits are very, very good. Mandy, did you find things in this that you would say, this is wonderful, this is my favourite, I loved this about the film?
I did. I had a few favorite moments, and even though I keep coming back to how much I disliked the story, I did think that the puppetry was masterful. Those practical effects were masterful, and visually it was stunning. Like, I enjoyed looking at it. From the first moment, like, I guess I didn't really understand how awesome it was until we got the first shot of Jen. We had seen the creepy Skeksis, and then we had seen kind of the Mystics, but then we get that shot of Jen playing the pan flute, and I was just thinking, wow, this is beautiful, and I've never seen a puppet done quite so well. Later, I kind of walked back on that a little bit with some of the stuff they did with Jen, but I thought overall it was beautifully done, and the cinematography was great.
Oh, I was just going to say, in reference to the puppets, they implemented some new technology with this movie. Traditionally, puppets had been made out of latex rubber, and they created a foam latex that they would overlay over fiberglass skulls to create a more flesh-like texture to all of the puppets used in this, and I think it was incredibly successful.
That actually makes a lot of sense, because I remember thinking that Jen and Kira both looked so much more lifelike than the Muppets do. Like, from their facial structure to the way their skin looked, like they didn't look like felt puppets, which is what we're accustomed to from the Hensons. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and they did talk about going through lots of iterations of the Jen and Kira puppets, trying to find the perfect look for them, because Jim Henson wanted something very classical, and they just couldn't get it right and felt like they were walking a bit of the uncanny valley before that term was actually coined with Jen and Kira, because they're supposed to be the characters that bridge the gap for us as humans coming into this world. And because they looked human-ish, but not quite, it was throwing some people out of the movie itself in the experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, they have a nice kind of elf-like thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Nice.
And there was a great line. Agra had a great line. She had a couple of really great lines, but my favorite was when the Skeksis had got her the Gartham. I can't remember, the crab creatures, the crab beetles, whatever they were. They brought her in, and they expected her to be a gelfling, and she's like,
Of course I'm no gelfling, you putrid lizards!
I cracked up. She had some great lines. She was very aggressive. I liked it.
Mm-hmm. I think moldy mildew mother of mouth muck is my absolute favorite that she says.
That's pretty great. And I'm just going to say, say that 5 times fast and see what happens.
Yeah. She is quite a well-realized character because she feels obviously completely separate from a lot of the story that's going on, this thing about the crystal. She's doing her own thing and perhaps has been around for a lot of that time, but has her own quirks and personality traits, where a lot of certainly the mystics don't get any development really. The podlings are Ewoks and just sort of happy little bouncy creatures. But Alga, as a secondary character, is really well done.
Agreed. She's my absolute favorite from the entire movie. I aspire to be her. She is my Patronus.
Oh, okay.
Excellent.
That's pretty great. What else did you really like from this movie?
One of my favorite things was the whole banquet scene where we see all the Skeksis and they're just consuming all of this food in this gluttonous display that is so revolting. And yet so fascinating because they have these beautiful metal instruments on the tips of their fingers that they're using to eat the food with. And it's just the attention to detail in that scene. I could watch it over and over again.
How interesting. I could not because it was gross.
See,
that's fantastic.
That scene in particular, I think they're just showing off because I think it opens with a shot of all of them there. So it's like, okay, there's probably like 15 puppeteers hidden in this scene doing different things all at the same time. And then we're going to have a wind-up toy run across it and one of them catch it and eat it in a shot. Like, okay, this is quite impressive.
So I read that each Skeksis took 6 puppeteers to control.
Wow.
There were 2 actually in the suit, and then they had 4 on a platform underneath to work everything else. So there were, I guess after the Emperor died, there were 9 left. That's a lot of puppeteers all in one scene.
Yeah, and I think it's really important just to call out the amazing physicality of the work that the puppeteers did in this show.
Yeah.
They would physically, the Skeksis and the Mystics were formed by having one hand up inside the head of the creature and the other arm manipulating one of the arms, and then the second person would manipulate the other arm. But just to think of being in that position with your arm above your head, holding onto this heavy frame for hours at a time, it just blows my mind, the amazing work that those performers did.
Oh, yeah. I also read that the Gartham suits were so heavy, they had to stop and rest every 5 minutes for the performers that were in it. And I can't imagine.
Not a bit. And then the Landstrider puppets were created on stilts, where the actors were on stilts on their feet and stilts on their hands. And they were able to run and jump and manipulate that in a way that is amazing. And also completely creepy, because the Landstriders are the creepiest thing in this movie. Hands down for me.
There is something unnerving about a creature that's quite so pale.
Well, and their faces were weird too. Like, you expect, especially as a child, when you're watching a fairy tale, you expect visual cues of the good guys are going to be pleasing to the eye and the bad guys are not. And you don't get that at all in this movie. The Gelflings and the Podlings are cute, but the Skeksis clearly are not. But then the Mystics are kind of in between, but they're supposed to be good. And then we're told that the Landstriders are good. But if you had just seen one, you would think, oh, they're a bad guy. Like, they didn't keep those visual cues that you expect in a fairy tale.
No, they look like elongated, monstrous bunnies. So to tie this into Buffy, because I know we have to do that, right? Anya would have hated the Landstriders.
Yes, absolutely. But I don't know that she would have stood on a chair to get away from them, because that would have gotten her closer to his face. Wow.
She probably would have rooted for the Gartham.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
And Yunko would have been a Landstrider herder or something.
All right. Okay. Well, Matthew, you're up. What are your favorite things from the movie?
So the one thing we've not really gone into detail on is the Chamberlain, the villain of the piece, who is one of my favorite villains from everything, ever.
Okay.
I love the noise.
I hate your whimper. Quiet!
The noise is possibly the first time I realised that when a film was made, they weren't just making it and putting it out into the world and hoping it was okay. They would actually think about how people were going to receive it. And the first time I sort of clocked they've given him a noise so that we know who is the Chamberlain because they all kind of look alike.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really nice way to have a character trait, quirk, tick that allows us to sort of track him through. And the typical thing of you see when people get a scar or, some sort of item of clothing or something that allows us to differentiate characters when they're quite similar. That's a really nice way of doing it, because they even call attention to it with I hate your noise. I am known to wander around doing that every so often. But he is a wonderful number two. Clearly, manipulative, out for his own efforts, and even when the way he tries to capture Jen by pretending to be good and reel him in.
But I am friend. Save you from Garthim. Why?
Don't listen to him. It's a trick.
No, please, must listen. I'm outcast. If I make peace, I'm outcast no more.
It's not too subtle, but he's doing more than anyone else. And better than the Garthim attacking them. And it's just, he makes the mistake of trying to become the number one, trying to become the Emperor. And given that it's a trial by stone, that it's a trial of strength, the general, the big Skeksis, is clearly going to be the one who wins that. So I don't even know why he goes along with it at that point, rather than saying, I'll back you up, just let me be your advisor or something.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I love him. I think he's wonderful. I think he's so well fleshed out and detailed in his characteristics, in his thinking, and the way we sort of see him at different points, figuring out the world and doing stuff with it. It's wonderful.
Excellent. I think he's completely delightful. The whimper that he does. Sometimes I highly enjoy it. Sometimes it grates on my nerves.
Oh, really?
But it's always a fabulous just character beat.
Yeah, like I said, when we're learning who is who, it helps so much because we don't quite have enough detail on them to know which is which. It's certainly in those early stages when they're all clustered together.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it holds up to rewatch value, because when you can take it all in and then look and pick apart the details as you're watching through it, the subtle things that they've done to differentiate each of the Skeksis are so well done.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, is there anything else that we need to discuss about the Dark Crystal?
Well, I just had one last behind-the-scenes tidbit that I thought was really adorable. Brian Froud, who was one of the creative conceptual designers of the Dark Crystal, met his wife, Wendy Meidner, on set. She was actually the doll maker who was in charge of creating the faces for Kira and for Jen. And they met there and married and worked together for many years.
Oh, that's very sweet.
Ah, there is something about all the Henson productions that have happy stories. People stay working in this world for years and years, or in that company for years and years, and do different jobs and meet their friends. And when you see the outpouring of love for, obviously, when Jim Henson passed, but just they're all so friendly and they get on so well and they clearly love what they do. It's a good thing when you see them making something, because they are a watermark of high quality.
Absolutely. to see that many people enjoying each other's company and the work that they do and the creativity that they seem to feed off of with each other is, you don't really see that in many other industries.
Absolutely. So, Amanda, Mandy has a giant list of things she's never seen. Do you have any favourite films that you would recommend we seek out and put on the list?
I have a few, absolutely. In kind of the theme of childhood fantasy that's also terrifying, I would recommend The Last Unicorn.
Well, that's a way to sell it. It's also terrifying.
It's incredibly beautiful animation. Mia Farrow's in it, Jeff Bridges, Angela Lansbury. They all do the voices.
Okay. Well, that sounds a little better.
I'm missing the main guy. Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee's in it.
Okay.
He's fantastic. It's a great cartoon. Mm-hmm.
I think you might be the third person who's recommended it now, so I think at this point we probably have to put it on the list. I think Jen and Caitlin have both said we should watch it, so...
Fantastic. That is a movie that I make everyone in my life watch at some point or another. So definitely The Last Unicorn. I know you guys did a lot of Christmas specials last year, so I would put forth for this year's Christmas Will Vinton's Claymation Christmas, if you haven't seen it.
Haven't even heard of it.
No.
It's from 1987, and it features the California Raisins at one point. It's pretty hysterical, and I love it. I watch it every Christmas.
Okay.
And then along with your documentary, kind of tipping your toes into that world, I would recommend Into the Inferno, which is a documentary on volcanoes by Werner Herzog.
That sounds interesting.
Oh, yeah, that sounds really interesting. Yep.
It's beautiful. Some of the shots that they get of the volcanoes are amazing.
Okay, I think they're going on the list.
Those are my recommendations.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if you would like to join the conversation, you can use the hashtag PCDeprived on Twitter. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Eloquent Gushing. You can also email us using podcast@eloquentgushing.com, or you can leave us a voice message at speakpipe.com/eloquentgushing. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Mandy K.
And I'm at Matthew Vose. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us and helping to convince Mandy that there is worth in here, that it is good in its way. It's been really, really fun having you on. Where can people find you in the world?
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed this. I can be found on Twitter at _Amanda313. And I'm also the Slytherin co-host of the Wine and Three Quarters podcast.
Yeah, Slytherin's rule. So what did you say? You're about to start covering The Fringe, or you're partway through it?
We've covered season 1 of Fringe. We're moving on to season 2. In the next couple of weeks, we'll be recording our episodes around that. So, and we've already done season 1 of The Expanse. Season 2, I'm sure, will be coming up soon as well.
Okay. What else have you covered in the past?
Oh my gosh. We have a bit of a breakdown where each of the 4 of us select the topic each week in a rotation. So my episodes tend to focus on personal growth, goals, things like that. We also do some fan casts. We talk about foods that we really like. We've done potlucks together. We recently went to roller derby for the first time and podcasted about that.
Oh, fun.
We've read some amazing books that I can't think of the titles to any of them right now, but
we've put you on the spot, haven't we?
I know. I did not prepare for this. But coming up soon, we're going to be talking about the Geek Feminist Revolution book by Cameron Hurley. So that's something we're all looking forward to talking about.
Oh, terrific. Great.
So we bounce around a lot of different things. And we are also on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is at wine and 3Q. So WINEAND numeral 3 letter Q.
Okay, perfect.
Soon to have a website, but not yet.
Excellent. It's always fun to hear friends having fun and discussing interesting things. So awesome.
Thank you.
Pop Culturally Deprived is 100% funded by listeners like you through Patreon. Anything you give gives access to exclusive content and helps to support the network and develop other shows. If you want to find out more, please visit patreon.com/eloquentgushing. And don't forget to visit our homepage where you can find the other shows on the network and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Go to eloquentgushing.com.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Pop Culturally Deprived where we'll talk about the movie Flatliners. Until next time, I'm Mandy Kay.
And I suffered horrible searing pain.
Oh, that was fantastic.
Pop Culturally Deprived is an Eloquent Gushing production. For more information, go to eloquentgushing.com or find us on Twitter @eloquentgushing.